Также сообщается, что главы Франции и ФРГ...
When Europe, speaking undiplomatically, literally pushes in with its assessments of the talks, insisting on its approaches, and trampling all the common sense that the Donald Trump administration showed after returning to the White House, we have no illusions regarding the Europeans' real plans. Especially since Mr. Zelensky, who insists on negotiations while putting forward absolutely unrealistic and even boorish conditions not only to Moscow, but also to his European handlers, directly stated the other day. Europe should think about the format of negotiations and propose several options, but Kyiv itself will determine who will be Europe's negotiator. No comment is needed. A Führer is a Führer. He was an amateur comedian, then was assigned the role of Führer. As you can see now, he took it too seriously. I would like to express my support to the Belarusian ambassador, who is present here today, and through him, to the Belarusian people, in connection with the terrorist act committed by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Bryansk region and in connection with the threats being made against Minsk by the Kyiv junta. I mean Zelensky's boorish statement demanding from a sovereign state to restore order on its territory, threatening that otherwise he himself would do that.
Are Europe's leaders quietly bracing their nations and militaries for a protracted grinding war with Russia that could last years instead of months? Lavrov publicly accuses European capitals of issuing harsh ultimatums and acting duplicitously toward the US, laying out those grievances in a blistering takedown aimed squarely at Trump's policies. Lavrov lashes out after accusing Zelensky of trying to dictate terms to Europe while making crude, self-serving demands, sparking an unusually furious response from Moscow. In a shock claim, Lavrov accuses Western governments of cynically treating Ukraine as expendable, suggesting Europe is willing to spill Ukrainian blood to serve its own strategic aims. Lavrov unleashes his most savage and inflammatory attack yet on Zelensky, using pointed rhetoric designed to provoke and scandalize international audiences. In incendiary language, Lavrov compares Zelensky's rise from comedian to authoritarian leader, even using a slur likening his behavior to that of a dictator, a remark guaranteed to inflame tensions.
According to Politico, the head of Costa's administration, Mr. Pedro Lordi, contacted officials in Moscow twice in recent weeks. It is also reported that the leaders of France and Germany condemned the Portuguese, Mr. Costa, for trying to establish contacts with Moscow on Ukrainian settlement. In particular, President Macron stated that the European Union, in principle, cannot be a mediator, since it supports Ukraine and has imposed sanctions on Russia. I leave this information on the conscience of Paris, which, let me tell you frankly, itself probably would not mind, secretly from Brussels and everyone else, asking for contacts with Moscow, without any permission, and Mr. Costa is forbidden to do this. I do not mean that we are very interested in these contacts. We know what they will lead to, but I am just illustrating how policy is made in the European Union, how seriously their constant statements should be taken that Russia must sit down at the negotiating table. We want to, but it does not want to. But we will talk when we want to. This is a complete muddle, and here I would not even pay attention to it, especially since Mr. Zelensky, who insists on negotiations while putting forward absolutely unrealistic and even boorish conditions not only to Moscow, but also to his European handlers, directly stated the other day. Europe should think about the format of negotiations and propose several options, but Kyiv itself will determine who will be Europe's negotiator. No comment is needed. A Führer is a Führer. He was an amateur comedian, then was assigned the role of Führer. As you can see now, he took it too seriously. When Europe, speaking undiplomatically, literally pushes in with its assessments of the talks, insisting on its approaches, and trampling all the common sense that the Donald Trump administration showed after returning to the White House, we have no illusions regarding the Europeans' real plans. We see the familiar game of the bad and the not-so-bad policeman on Europe's part. This does not change the essence. If everything we hear from Brussels, London, Paris, Berlin, and other capitals is translated into plain language, Moscow is being demanded to capitulate. That is precisely the essence of the statements by Macron, Starmer, and Merz after the meeting with Zelensky on June 7th in London. A few days later, the ambassadors of these countries, as we reported, asked to come to our foreign ministry only to confirm the London ultimatum. No proposals about anything else were voiced. When various international problems have been discussed, Washington has repeatedly stated that it has no restrictions in the form of international law, whether regarding multilateral or bilateral treaties, and that the United States, as you know, has its own morality. If in the United States the Defense Department has already been transformed into the War Ministry, then let this planned European Defense Union be called a war union. That would be more honest. In any case, Europe is once again becoming the main threat to international peace and security. Brussels, together with Paris, Berlin, London, once again, like Hitler's Germany before the Second World War, are rallying the continent under the banners of neo-Nazism and Russophobia. This time these banners are being handed to Zelensky, putting him at the forefront of the war against Russia. In today's situation, as you can see, Poland alone was outraged when Zelensky knelt before the ashes of Hitler's accomplice, a Bandera executioner of Poles and Jews, Russians and Belarusians, at the solemn reburial ceremony of those ashes. All the rest of the Western states kept silent about such mockery of the memory of the victims of Nazism, and kept silent not at all bashfully, but essentially encouragingly. It is telling that when President Nawrocki stripped Zelensky of Poland's highest order, all previous presidents of Ukraine began returning their Polish orders as a sign of solidarity with the head of the regime, Poroshenko, Yushchenko, and even Kukma, who during his rule in the early 2000s was not publicly noticed aiding Nazi ideology. This means that the Kyiv rulers had been harboring these Nazi, racist attitudes for a long time. They just used to keep them secret. The Netherlands are working through a scenario for creating camps for Russian prisoners of war on their territory in the event of a war with us. In essence, the same concentration camps that Germany created in Europe during the Second World War. At the same time, they openly acknowledge that for better preparation for war with Russia, Europe still needs some more time. And the head of the Belgian General Staff cynically stated a couple of months ago, I quote, "We still have several years thanks to the blood of Ukrainians, who are buying us this time." In East Asia, where until recently everyone recognized the central role of ASEAN and the universal partnership mechanisms of cooperation created within this association, now closed, bloc-based groupings of 3, of 4 with a military focus are being created, some even with a nuclear component. NATO is already declaring that contrary to its charter goal of defending the territory of member states, the alliance has the right to dominate across the entire Eurasian continent as well. Work, brothers. Many years ago, our Dagestani fighter transmitted these words over the radio before his death. He was surrounded by a gang of terrorists in the Caucasus. In the end, those terrorists were destroyed. The same fate awaits their modern followers. I would like to express my support to the Belarusian ambassador, who is present here today, and through him, to the Belarusian people, in connection with the terrorist act committed by the Ukrainian armed forces in the Bryansk region and in connection with the threats being made against Minsk by the Kyiv junta. I mean Zelensky's Boorish statement demanding from a sovereign state to restore order on its territory, threatening that otherwise he himself would do that. In this regard, since we are discussing European-related topics today, I would like to quote a spokesperson for the European Commission, Ms. Hipper, who is from Germany. When journalists asked her yesterday whether the European Union supported Zelensky's recent statement calling on the Belarusian leadership to remove certain relay stations from its territory, she immediately accused Minsk of continuing to assist Russia in its aggression against Ukraine and of Minsk's allegedly provocative actions against the European Union and its member states, including airspace violations and using migrants to exert pressure. She lumped everything she could remember into one big pile. She concluded by saying that this was precisely why the European Union had imposed sanctions against Lukashenko's regime, as she put it, and was prepared to take further action and measures until the Belarusian authorities changed their actions and behavior. She stated quite explicitly, I quote, "And of course Ukraine has the right to defend itself." This German lady openly endorsed the threats made yesterday by Zelensky against a sovereign state, promising to use force should this dictator Zelensky so wish. I therefore believe that this cynical attempt must be condemned. It is clearly aimed at dragging Belarus straight into the conflict and spreading the fighting to a wider area, thereby making it more difficult to resolve the conflict through political and diplomatic means. In this regard, I would like to remind those in Kyiv who resort to such propaganda and threats, and those in the West who do the same and support the Nazi regime. That, since March 2025, a treaty has been enforced between the Russian Federation and the Belarusian Republic on security guarantees within the Union state. Should the need arise, we are prepared to implement all measures provided for in the document to ensure our allies' security and, naturally, that of the Union state.
We strongly condemn the attack on the bus carrying children, like the events in Starobelsk. We regard this as a terrorist act against a civilian population, for which there is no justification, and there cannot be any. Moreover, as the Belarusian president has stated, attacking children is outright fascism. Belarus expects an immediate and thorough investigation into this tragedy. This cynical, deliberate attack on civilians must be subject to a rigorous legal assessment, including by international human rights bodies. The conflict raging on Belarus's borders has not merely dragged on, it is intensifying with each passing day. The most appalling thing we are witnessing today is the deliberate, targeted attacks on the civilian population. Innocent people are being killed and civilian infrastructure is being destroyed. We cannot turn a blind eye to this. We call for an end to these dangerous games with security in our region. Enough of fanning the flames. It is time to stop flooding the conflict zone with weapons and halt provocative statements, which only bring us closer to the breaking point. We welcome and support any efforts aimed at resolving the Ukrainian crisis and reaching a peaceful settlement. A lasting peaceful settlement is possible only through establishing a new, inclusive security architecture in our region and in Eurasia as a whole. This architecture must be based on the sovereign equality of states, the indivisible security principles, and international law. The Eurasian Charter on Diversity and Multipolarity in the 21st century, initiated by Belarus with the active support from Russia, is set to make a significant contribution to this process. The core group of supporters of the Charter's principles has been formed, who are ready to take part in the ministerial meeting in New York in September 2026. When combat drones target children on their way to a holiday, there is no room for ambiguous interpretations. This terrorist attack is a terrible reminder that, in today's world, no one can feel safe. Security must either be indivisible and shared by all, or no one will have it. The response to this challenge cannot be a local one. We need to have transparent oversight mechanisms and strict legal obligations, and we must reject using pressure and terror as political tools. Only in this way can we restore stability and safeguard a peaceful future for future generations.